Hey guys, and welcome to Anchor to Truth. Tonight we are diving into chapter 9 of the book of Jubilees. So let's get started.
And it says in verse 1, and Ham divided amongst his sons, and the first portion came forth for Cush towards the east, and to the west for him for Mitzrayim, and to the west of him for Put, and to the west of him, and to the west thereof on the sea for Canaan.
All right, before we go into each breakdown, because again, this is the division of the land for the grandchildren, let's take a moment and go ahead and look at these maps up here. Okay, so we can see how they have it divided out already. So we've got this green area that's listed as Japheth's territory. Ham is listed, which I don't know why it's blue here. I think that's just to show a division here. Because he's saying that North America is actually divided between Japheth and Ham, is what he's saying here. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. Just thought I'd point out how he has this divided. So that'll kind of give you an idea. All the orange is listed as Shem's territory. All the green is listed as Japheth's territory. And all the yellow is listed as Ham's territory. So in this chapter, we're looking at the division of the breakdown of each one of those sons' children's territories. Okay, so looking at the breakdown for Ham's descendants, all of this territory is being shown, at least, in the continent of Africa. So we have Cush here in Ethiopia, Mitzrayim is Egypt, Put is Libya, and Canaan, he's calling it the slave coast here. It says Canaan received West Africa, but he chose to take land from Arpachshad instead. He stole what would become the land of Canaan, thus its name before it was Israel. He was cursed a second time by his father and brothers for doing so. And this is why it was referred to as the promised land restored to Abraham's descendants, but promised in Noah's division of the earth. Now, if I scroll back up here to this map, we have this listed as Ham's territory, and this listed as Ham's territory, as well as South America and the lower half of North America listed as Ham's territory. Yet we don't see any information whatsoever on this as to whose territory this is supposed to be.
Yeah, and speaking on the curse being further carried out, let's look at Australia, for example. I mean, other than the natural inhabitants of there, the Aborigines who lived there for a very long time, we see that Australia, the modern day, what you would say Australia, was started because all the prisoners from the Europe, from the British government sending all of their worst convicts or the worst of the people to go to Australia. And now it is a democracy. It is a place, that's a desirable place to go and vacation to. But you even look at the early beginnings of Australia with that, and how there was robbers, crooks, murderers, all your worst of the worst were all being sent to Australia, which initially, I guess, or eventually got it to where it is today. All right, guys, let's jump into verse 2 of chapter 9. It says, and Shem also divided amongst his sons, and the first portion came forth for Elam and his sons to the east of the river of Hiddekel, till it approaches the east and the whole land of India, and on the Red Sea on its coast, and the waters of Dedan, and all the mountains of Mebri, and Allah, and all the land of Susan, and all that is on the side of the Parnak, to the Red Sea, and the river Tina. And for Ashur came forth the second portion, and all the land of Ashur, and Nineveh, and Shinar, and to the borders of India, and it ascended, and skirteth the river. And for Arpachshad came forth the third portion, all the land of the region of the Chaldees, to the east of the Euphrates, bordering on the Red Sea, and all the waters of the desert close to the tongue of the sea, which looketh towards Egypt, all the land of Lebanon, and Sinir, and Ammana, and to the borders of the Euphrates. And for Aram there came forth the fourth portion, all the land of Mesopotamia, between Hiddekel and the Euphrates, to the north of the Chaldees, to the borders of the mountains of Ashur, and the land of Arara. And there came forth from Lud the fifth portion, the mountains of Ashur, and all appertaining to them, till it reacheth the great sea, until it reacheth the east of Ashur, his brother.
Okay, so with Shem's territory, we are looking at the orange area here, and the breakdown of the division of the grandchildren's land begins with
Elam.
Elam, that's down here in the India area, west of Iran, all the way to India. All this down here.
All right. The next one is Arpachshad.
That's the Israel area, stolen by Canaan. It runs all the way over to West Iran.
All right. So our next one is Aram.
That's right up here in the Mesopotamia area, just
And
north
then
of
we got,
Israel.
that's it. Then we got Ashur.
Directly north of that in the
And then we
Assyria
got,
area.
and then we got Lud or Lud or however you want to say his name.
All right, Lud is west of that, so we're looking in the Turkey area. Gobble gobble. Hey guys, if you are getting some good information out of these studies and would like to continue along with us, be sure to subscribe and tag that notification bell. So if you look over here, you see Madai, and it says out of area. Because Madai is actually one of Japheth's sons. Up here in the notes, it says Nephilim roam most of this area, but especially the northlands of Scythia in Japheth and Shem's lands. They also migrate in and out of Canaan, Israel, and Madai Media because the inhabitants who stole those two lands were cursed. The Great Wall of China was once called the ramparts of Gog and Magog. These are two Nephilim giants in ancient folklore. Ezekiel outlines Gog of Magog as a conquering colonial power.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on in that region of the world. You know, you see like you look at this giant map, and then all these names are kind of consolidated right there toward the middle. So it definitely lets you know where things are happening, where the beginning of the world started, and where they started to spread from.
Hmm.
You know how we talked about the Ark and the North Pole and everything starting way up there in the islands,
Hmm.
but all the places they're naming and everywhere where everybody's at is down here.
Hmm. In this general area, yeah.
So it seems like the original canon story of it starting around Israel, somewhere in that region ish. I mean, if you look, that's the center point of everything that's happening. When you look at the Americas, nothing's really happening. You look all the way to the right, nothing's really happening. You look down to the bottom, nothing's really happening. It's all centrally located. So it just kind of seems like there would be an unnecessary trip to go from the middle of the North Pole area all the way down to here and then start dividing the land.
Right, because it only shows this portion, and it's phrased as the then known world a lot by historians, but we really don't have mention of, let's say, Australia or North and South America. Like none of that is mentioned in any of this division of land whatsoever. I mean,
It's almost
even
like just pick a point and anything that direction, and pick a point and anything that direction. We don't know what's over there yet, but if it is something, you can have it. But it just reminded me of our conversation we had on the last video of like, where all the locations were and where the ark might have landed. And
all right, so let's go back down over here to Ham, and I'm gonna show a point here. So it says, it gives in back in verse 1, it's talking about and to the west of him for put, to the west of to the west of Mitzrayim for put, and then it says, and to the west of him, and to the west thereof on the sea for Canaan. So Canaan's territory is basically to the west of Put, all the way to the sea. We have no mention anything west of that. So when this guy makes claim that all of this is Ham's territory and all of this is Japheth's territory, it don't make sense. None of this is mentioned whatsoever. None of this is even brought up. This is not brought up unless we're all missing something here.
well, I think from his perspective or the group, they're trying to account for all the lands and in the best way possible. West is west, so they just went and drew a line and said, okay, well that's where South America's at. So assumably that would.
Well, that would make sense, but it says that Canaan's territory is to the sea. Well, once you get to the sea,
Oh, it says on
that's
the
it.
sea and to the west thereof on the sea. So it's like saying like
it
almost like if you cross the sea, whatever's over there too.
well, it's referencing coastal land on the sea.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't
Well,
see where this is referenced in at all. It doesn't
the
make sense.
Americas have always been a problem for biblical theology and historical accounting and stuff because it's just
Mhm.
essentially a new land that no one's ever really been, able to really track down of where we belong, what part do we play in prophecy. Like we can't even be found anywhere in prophecy. So it's
Right.
almost like it makes sense that it wouldn't be recognized early because it's not recognized late. It's just a land where people get to settle because we're always looking for what's America's part in all this, and maybe we don't have a part.
Well, let's move on to Japheth's territory, and maybe something will jump out at us.
All right, let's pick up with verse 7. And Japheth also divided the land of his inheritance amongst his sons. And the first portion came forth for Gomer to the east from the north side to the river Tina. And in the north there came forth for Magog all the inner portions of the north until it reacheth to the sea of Meat. And for Madai came forth as his portion that he should possess from the west of his two brothers to the islands and to the coast of the islands. And for Javan came forth the fourth portion, every island and the islands which are towards the border of Lud. And for Tubal there came forth the fifth portion in the midst of the tongue, which approacheth towards the borders of the portion of Lud, to the second tongue, to the region beyond the second tongue, unto the third tongue. And in verse 12, and for Meshech came forth the sixth portion, all the region beyond the third tongue, till it approacheth east of Gedir. And for the Tyrus there came forth the seventh portion, 4 great islands in the midst of the sea, which reached to the portion of Ham, and the islands of Kamaturi came out by lot for the sons of Arpachshad as his inheritance.
Okay, so something I noticed right away that gives us a little bit more clarity as to where those borders are is in this section referencing Japheth's children's territory. In verse 9, it says, And from Madai came forth his portion that should possess from the west of his two brothers to the islands and to the coasts of the islands. So over here to the right, it says, including Britain and Ireland, right? So if we go back up here to the map, this is showing all of this area over here. You can see my cursor. All of this area right here as being Madai or Madai's territory. So here's a thought. When Madai went over here, they were out of their area and there was a curse. But, you know, the United States has always been this quote unquote melting pot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, I know that there's more to the North American and South American continent than the United States. However, for the most part, North and South America has been flourishing lands. For the most part.
Mm-hmm.
However, when they fall into great sin, things change. Blessings and curses, that kind of thing, right?
Yep.
Even though it's not mentioned again. So I mean, there's some assumption obviously going into this. You know, these areas not being mentioned. South America has some of the most beautiful rainforests and just lush lands that you could ever ask for. Wonderful climate, just gorgeous stuff, right? It makes me wonder if these lands were reserved as sort of a, I don't know, almost like a safe haven for those who did not know the territory they were to be in, but wanted to seek the Father's ways. Because remember, I mean, if you just think back, I mean, only far enough, which I know this is in the greater context of history, you know, the United States is 200 years old, right? So that's not a lot of time in the context of the big picture here. But as a nation, we're just over 200 years old, right? So, but for the majority of that, we've been a very blessed land.
Mm-hmm.
And for the majority of that, I'd say people have, well, there's always been bad, right? There's always bad.
Right.
You know, the people who were fleeing Europe and that sort of stuff was coming here for the most part to flee tyrannical governments, whether it was religious freedom or whatever. We have lots of people from Europe, from Asia, and from Africa that were fleeing for the sake of religious freedoms. It just makes me wonder if this area over here wasn't somehow, I don't know, left out of this for the sake of a safe place, a safe haven. And as long as we are trusting and obeying, we're good. I don't know. What are y'all's thoughts?
Yeah, what's it called? Like when you go to when you committed a crime, it was like the city, a haven city or city for haven until like the next king died or the next priest. I'm trying to remember exactly how it played
It
out,
was
but
a city of refuge.
Refuge, thank you. Yeah, that's the right
Yeah,
word.
yeah,
So it almost sounds a lot like Kyle, what you were just saying. It sounds like that could be a little bit of that where you get to go away for a while until things can be restored. And there is some semblance of that playing out with our world today. Is we're waiting for Jerusalem, we're waiting for that land to be restored, and maybe we are in our land of refuge, our city of refuge for a time until the true King comes back and sets everything back straight. So I can definitely see some connection you're making there, and I think maybe I can add a little bit to that and how my brain's working today.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't have anything to point to that to say that that's what that is, but I mean,
Yeah.
just makes you go, hmm.
Well, in the history of the world, the United States, just what you said earlier, is a what we call a melting pot.
Mhm,
There's no other nation in the world that has accepted more immigrants than the United States of America that I know of. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but let's face it, Russia isn't opening up their borders. China isn't. You don't want to open up their borders. All these different places all over the world aren't opening up they're not opening up themselves to receive the amount of people. Now, there's people who come into our land illegally, not going into all that stuff, but there are people who come here to America looking for that opportunity.
mhm,
America is built on the backbone of a lot of different nations, a lot of different people groups, that came here looking for a fresh start. Like you said, in the early days, it was about religious freedom to come here and to worship God freely and not have the oppression over them that they were under at the time. So this is a unique land that we live in that has been an opportunity. All the immigrants who come in through New York, from the
mhm.
Irish, the Scottish, the Polish, the Jews. I mean, everyone who's come into America who's contributed, to our great land to make it is what it is today. There's no other nation that I know of that has allowed this many different diversity of people coming in, people groups coming in. And it's what's made it such I believe, a great nation overall. One thing to say though, there were, when we looked at that map earlier, it talked about the Nephilim and it talks about over near the Gog and Magog and all that stuff, how the Nephilim cities. And here in the United States, we do have history of there being giants here. Matter
Mhm.
of fact, President Abraham Lincoln actually wrote about it in one of his speeches about over at Niagara Falls, talked about the giants who used to roam the land, and they already knew about these tombs that were all over the place, and about the
Yeah.
Native Americans who lived here and had to deal with these extraordinary large people who were also cannibals that would eat their dead, they would eat people out of the grave, all this crazy stuff. Thank God that we don't have to deal with that anymore, as none of that's here any longer. But we see that there was at one point in our land, there was an overflow of this genetic anomaly that we like to call the Nephilim. We're here in the United States.
Yeah.
And just one other point, real quick: the Native Americans who have lived here for a very long time. When you go back and you research out their religion, a lot of people think, well, they speak about this spirit and this spirit, all these different things. But when you go back to the core fundamentals of the Native Americans, you can actually find Torah woven within their belief system. So
Yeah.
there's something to be said about all that as well.
With a lot of Native American in my lineage, and being very interested in that growing up, and being and growing up going to powwows, and growing up going to different things. There are tribes that leaned very much towards this Torah walk, and there
Mhm.
were tribes that were far from it. There were tribes that were
Right.
completely on the opposite spectrum of that. When we're looking at the division of these lands, we think of the Native Americans, and even in South America we have like the Aztecs and all this other stuff, right? All these are these um, um, brown skinned folks, brown skin, red skin, whatever you want to call it. It makes me wonder though if there wasn't some type of what is the word, a great movement of refugees in the past that we're not as familiar with,
Mm. Like an
fleeing.
Exodus.
Yeah, like an exodus, like we can't go to the land that we're supposed to because it's been seized, and we can't go to someone else's land because that would be cursed, so we're going to go somewhere else. Makes me wonder.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
If it didn't start out that way, if that's where the maybe the Native Americans, as we call them, right? Maybe that's why they got here, was they were fleeing persecution and not wanting to be cursed, so they went to a completely different land altogether. Maybe that's where the Aborigines came from as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? Possibility. I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
much about the Aboriginal people. I don't, so I can't really speak to that and their history, and if there's any kind of Torah something in their stuff. I don't know, but it's
I
very interesting to think about.
honestly think there's Torah in everything, and every that's my personal opinion. I believe that there is some remnants of Torah throughout the entire world and every culture that went forth. My wife being half Japanese, we watched a video probably 8 years ago. It was a very interesting video because there are certain practices, or there's during certain festivals that the Japanese people do certain things and say certain things, and when they're asked why they do it, they say we don't know. This is something we've been doing for a really long time. And my wife, now being in this walk, both of us being in this walk together, she's looking back going, wait a minute, that actually looks like Torah. That actually, so there's remnants when they're doing these certain festivals, and they're doing these dances, and they're doing certain things in Japanese, and it's like they don't know why they're doing it, but it's actually, to me, this is showing Torah, and they
Hmm.
don't even realize that they're still partaking in that. So, and in a lot of the language, like the Japanese language, because my wife can read and speak Japanese, and when we were learning Hebrew, my wife would get more confused because a lot of the characters in Hebrew would be very similar to the characters in Japanese, in the Japanese language. So, yeah.
That would make a lot of sense. So we know that based on reading the scripture of prophecy that is to come, um, scriptures tell us that after Yeshua returns, after Jesus returns, that the law will be placed on our hearts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you will not have to tell your brother to know Torah or know the law, because it will be on their hearts. You will not have to
You're doing
teach
it
one
wrong,
another.
man.
Yeah, you won't have to do any of that stuff, right? Because everyone will already know. Everyone will have it on their hearts.
That's right.
Well, there's argument out there that that it's already on our heart, that it's already written on our hearts. And there's one particular scripture that's used for that, even though I find it greatly taken out of context. But I wonder if that's what it means.
you talking about Romans 2:15?
Yes. So
Oh,
actually, Romans, I think it starts in 14. Let's see. Yep. For when the nations who do not have the Torah by nature do what is in the Torah, although not having the Torah, they are a Torah to themselves.
mm,
And then in verse 15, who show the work of the Torah written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or even excusing. So this is a particular scripture that people will use to try to say, okay, see, the law is already written on our hearts. But it tells you in the context of what's being said there that
right.
they don't have Torah. They don't have it, right? So this is as a Torah for themselves, and it references specifically. Hang on, let's go back up to verse 14. For when nations who do not have the Torah by nature,
Mm-hmm.
by nature, it is a natural thing. Why is it natural? We don't know. It's just right. So when
Yeah.
you said that, Joe, about the Japanese having certain traditions and things that they do that looks very Torah-ish, it makes me wonder if these things that are part of our history that we don't know where it came from or why we
Yep.
have it, but it looks very Torah-ish, it makes
Hmm.
me wonder if that isn't something that the enemy has tried to remove, but because of tradition, we continue to do them anyway, even if we don't know why
Mm-hmm.
we do them.
Exactly.
That's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And it
And
shows an amazing aspect of how the Father truly is just and righteous. in his judgment.
Amen.
That's
Amen.
awesome.
That I think that might be another reason why, when some friends of ours were in Israel for a conference years ago, and at that meeting, they had people there who lived in the most remote places in the world, little islands, little villages, and they were all meeting in Israel about the Torah and and they were sharing how their little village and that you would never even think of, not even a blip on the map, all of a sudden Torah's flourishing like crazy where they live at. In the most remote places in the world, these people are showing up and sharing how all of a sudden they're in Torah. They're following the ways of Yah. And I'm like, that's amazing
That's
to
awesome.
hear that. That has to be God. That has to be
Yeah.
Abba doing this. It can't be just somebody ate some bad pizza the night before and woke up the next morning and was like, oh, I think I want to do Torah. I think I want to do, start researching the Bible more, whatever it might have, whatever it was that pulled them into it. But here's the thing about that. When you talk about it being written on our heart, I think there's something for those who have a spirit to receive, or I don't know if that's the right word, a spirit to receive, or they have the ability to receive what the Spirit is saying. Because if you're living in the most remote places in the world, all of a sudden Torah grabs a hold of you, the Holy Spirit grabs a hold of you, and the next thing you know, this grabs a hold of your entire being, and you're like, you know what? I don't know why, but I really feel driven towards something, towards this, of keeping the Sabbath, of eating clean, of all these different things that we do in this walk. And again, I think that's where Abba's like, hey, y'all, the enemy can do whatever you want, but at the end of the day, I'm going to show up in such a way that I will get all the glory for this and nobody else will.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and down that train of thought, something that I was kind of considering too, we were talking about how the Torah is spread and how the different nations. And I know when we were looking at the map earlier, we saw that North America was half and half with Japheth and Ham. But when we read one of our earlier chapters, it mentioned that crossing over the Russia to Alaska region, that Bering Strait of, so that would, if you really look at it from that perspective, you're thinking that Shem's area goes all the way out to that little corner of Russia out there in the Atlantic. So if Shem just crossed over like 10 miles, now he's in North America. And then you can see why North America is more, not to say that it's blessed, because I definitely don't want to say that it's blessed above anywhere else. We're all people living on the earth trying to take care of business. But you can see where some of that understanding of Torah, where some of that church, where some of those things that would have kind of represented Shem in his land, how that does transfer a little bit more closely aligned to some of the things that came from the land of Shem and crossing over. But then you can also see that influence from Japheth coming over from England and all those type of countries, and France and the Spaniards, how we almost have that influence as well. And it's that's where that mixing comes in. But it's like a mixing of two of the suns, like almost together. One hit the East Coast and one hit the West Coast, and we have like those two kind of combined there. And I thought that was something that was interesting, that allows us to maybe recognize how all these aspects play a part, where we have Native Americans for a while, but then we have the Europeans for a while, and who knows what the future is going to look like. But it seems like that map movement would make a lot more sense for us, seeing that it might just literally be why he has it cut down the middle or whatever. I don't know about the Ham part, but we have everybody here. So the people from Shem could have just literally walked over. They didn't even have to have some big voyage and a 1492 sailing the ocean blue and all that.
All right. Well, one more thing to point out. If we go over here to verse 8, it says, in the first portion came forth to Gomer, north of the river Tina, and the north came there forth Magog. Okay, Magog, all the inner portions of the north, until it reacheth to the sea of meat, or Meat, however you want to say that. Some big old meaty sea. All right. Well, if we go back to the map, and we remember what was referenced previously in the division of Shem, Ham, and Japheth's territory. Remember the Sea of Meat. These people translated that, or however you want to call that. They called that the Atlantic Ocean. Right? They were claiming that was the Atlantic Ocean. So if that's the case, then all of that would include, I think he got it backwards when we look at the map.
Well, let's look at it.
So yeah, so if we're referencing Japheth's territory here that's being split up, and the reference there was until it reaches the Sea of Meat, That's the point I'm trying to make. Is if it's until it reaches that sea, well, that's the Atlantic Ocean.
Hmm.
So none of this territory over here would be referenced as Japheth's territory. None of North America would be part of Japheth's territory unless I wonder what that looks like.
On a different map.
Well, I say, yeah, if you shift the whole map over and you don't have North America on the left, you have it in the middle. All of a sudden, things look a little different,
I think he's going with a flat map.
right? Versus a circle, and also it's got the traditional America on the left and Asia on the right. Well, if you flip it around, it makes way more sense for Asia to touch America than it does Europe to touch America. So technically, the way I was looking at it was North and South America could both be all of Shem's territory still, because it's the only one that actually touches.
Looking at a map that shows biblical cosmology,
Top down, at least.
looking from top down, right? This white circle would represent Antarctica. It appears to me that North America would fall under Shem's territory,
Hmm.
and that South America
In Africa.
and Africa would be in the same kind of general area for the most part.
Right.
Well, other than North America is connected to South America, you know what I mean? I wonder if it's like one big long extended South America all the way into Israel.
I don't know. It is a lot to get your brain wrapped around, though, isn't it?
South America is connected to North America. North America, when there's an ice bridge, is connected to Asia or Russia.
Yep. Yeah, Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's why there's no landmark splitting it anywhere else other than over there by Israel and Egypt and Turkey. Those are the landmarks. There's no other landmarks out after you get past there. It's just until you hit the water. Just keep going west. And even then, your cardinal directions are all possibly different if you're looking at this map.
Right. So I think if we had a more accurate map, we could really look and see how this division is supposed to be. So I think it was using the North Pole as a reference for north to give us the north. Shem's territory was what in relation to this? Do you remember?
All right, it says, and there came forth on the writing as Shem's lot, the middle of the earth, which he should take as an inheritance for himself, for his sons. So the middle. And it says, from the middle of the mountain range of the Rapha, wherever that was, from the mouth of the water of the river Tina. And then from there, his portion goes west. So in the middle and then to the west. And
Well,
it goes forth and poureth its waters into the sea Maed. I think that's why we were confused about that sea earlier, is because it sounds like, oh, you'd go over to hit Pacific, but it looks like somehow Shem's area goes all the way to the left. Maybe that's how. If it goes all the way into North America, which then would touch the Sea of Atlantic. You know what I mean? Because you have Japheth in the way, so how would it get to the Atlantic other than North America?
I think you're on to something right there, though, Kyle, with the Giza pyramids.
yeah. So this is we have the pyramids of Giza listed or shown to be the quote unquote center of the earth. These people are laying claim that it's the navel of the world. And I guess that kind of makes sense. I mean, the navel is how it's referenced in the scripture,
Right.
right? And center,
Right.
which means, so when we think North Pole as being center, but that's because we're always looking at a map that we've been shown.
Right. Now, Israel would have been part of Shem's, right?
Yes.
Yes.
But
All right, and we know the borders of Israel exceed out further than what the modern day, right?
correct.
So that still would have been part of the blessing of Shem. So when it's using that terminology as the navel of the earth, I think very well it could be, because it's part of the where the Giza pyramids are. That's part of, technically that's Shem's territory.
I believe that it is, yes.
So then that would
So-
make sense if we're taking a reference point from here and then going out from there. And maybe that when we're thinking about land masses and we're thinking about what seas are connecting might make more sense to us in how everything was split up.
So here's my issue. Right here, where this emblem is, or where this cursor is the navel of the earth, if that's the Pyramid of Giza.
Well, does the navel necessarily mean center? I mean, it's not in the center of my body.
Well, I find it to be very interesting that if where the Pyramid Giza is, if that's supposed to be the center of all things, the navel of the world, and you look at the pyramids that we know were not created by man, let's put it that way, and how they do study the stars through the pyramid. Supposedly there's electricity flowing through this pyramid. There's a lot going on with this pyramid prior to the flood. I don't know. It's just kind of interesting that would be the focal point right there.
Well, and it's right there at the Nile River and right there on the original Israel border.
Yep.
And it has the two great seas, the Red Sea and the Mediterranean.
Yep.
One gives you access to the Atlantic, and the other one gives you access to the Indian and everything else.
33 and a third is an equal
Is-
division between three children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Yeah.
So we're just going to have to dive into this a little bit more later on because we are running out of time. But this is super, super interesting. Please tell us your theories, your thoughts, your comments. Let us know what you think down in the description below. But I guess for now we need to get back to chapter 9.
All right, let's go ahead and go into verse 14 of chapter 9. And thus the sons of Noah divided unto their sons in the presence of Noah their father, and he bound them all by an oath, imprecating a curse on every one that sought to seize the portion which had not fallen to him by his lot. And they all said, So be it for themselves and their sons forever throughout their generations till the day of judgment, on which the Yahuwah Elohim shall judge them with a sword and with fire, for all the unclean wickedness of their errors, wherewith they have filled the earth with transgression and uncleanliness and fornication and sin.
Again, we're being told, hey, we know you're going to goof up. We know you're going to mess up. There's going to be wickedness and their errors, wherewith they have filled the earth with transgression and uncleanness and fornication and sin and all that kind of good stuff, right? Or bad stuff, I guess. But I find it interesting that they did this division of territory in front of Noah, right? In his presence, and him still being the one with the authority there, right? The head of the households, the elder of all the groups, had them swear an oath and set before them blessings and curses.
Well, that was one of my initial thoughts was, I wonder if they were doing all these kind of in secret or not even in secret, just kind of keeping it to themselves. Like, I'll give this land to this kid and this kid. But yeah, it's great to know that, God didn't miss any steps along the way. There was never any confusion. There was never going to be any, future fighting that was just, they could fight all they wanted, but this said these lands were sealed all the way until judgment. So there's no changing it. But what really made me start to kind of ponder was thinking of just all the ways the world has moved since then, with colonialism and the slave trade and different things like that. Like, are we literally taking what God said, hey, these areas are supposed to be kind of sealed and this is for you and don't go occupy and take other people's land, and then we in fact literally went and did that exact same thing of, where now that's why English is the most spoken language in the world, and why we see French in some random places and Spanish and Portuguese. You're like, they were originally in their own place, but then came and, traveled other places and tried to either take over or, make colonies out of it, which we understand it's mostly all about money. But at the same time, it does make you wonder about where those transgressions and uncleanliness come from. Is, did they bring that stuff with them? Like with the Native Americans and some of the stories we hear about, like the diseases and the smallpox and things that came with them. It just makes you wonder, like, when you're in your group, things are what they're supposed to be, and you're dealing with the things that belong to your people. And not to say that we shouldn't diversify and stuff like that, of course not, but there's just definitely a lot of thought process with the way we've decided as the world to move versus the way that it's set up here in front of us, way back when.
And Kyle, could we go back up to the top of that page where it has the footnotes right there on the side? I thought that was pretty important to read that too while we're talking about taking of land. It said it is critical to understand this mapping is not arbitrary, nor can it leave anything to chance, as to disobey this division is to bring a curse on one's family. No brother is to take the other brother's territory. It is one thing to live there, but another entirely to seize it as it is as theirs. This is a complete rebuke of colonialism and conquest, other than to restore which was stolen, such as Israel, taking back the land of Canaan from Ham's descendants and the Nephilim.
That says it.
So it wasn't necessary that you couldn't go live in another brother's land, but he's saying you can't show up and say, "Hey, I claim this land, the name of my family, and it's ours."
Right.
It was very clear to Daddy Noah was like, "Hey, and if you do these things to one another, this will become a curse unto you." So it was very clear that they all took an oath and they agreed to this oath. And I believe we see the similar talk when we look in the book of Enoch, and when the 200 watchers came and they said, "We all will be bound by an oath to do this thing."
Mutual
And
imprecation.
that's it right there. So there was no way any of these sons could go back. "Well, Dad, I just didn't know." When he's like, "No, son, you understood the day that you took an oath, you understood not to do these things,"
Well,
which
not
kind of
just that,
maybe,
but they left their first estate. That's literally what that's talking about. Here's what was given to you. They left it and took someone else something of that didn't belong to them.
I think that word is very important and quite literal. And we think of
absolutely.
real estate, property.
Yeah. So it goes to show you how important your word was when you gave an oath. And I think this kind of reminds me of the time when Yeshua said, "Hey, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Don't swear upon this and don't swear upon that." Basically making an oath or making a statement of, swearing upon it. Because he says, "Hey, don't swear upon the earth, or, don't swear upon the heavens. Don't do these things." It's simply let your yes be yes and your no be no.
Mm.
And these guys here with this oath, he's basically saying you're making an oath. So upon this oath, you know what the consequences are. When you basically you're all going to strike hands together and say, "Hey, I won't touch my brother's stuff. You don't touch my stuff, and we're all going to be good, right?" And so we find out later they went all right when it was all said and done.
We have these nation states that are corporate entities now. The majority of land out there is not sovereign land. The majority of land that's out there now is corporate owned, corporately financed by banks and bankers and that sort of thing, that who knows what nation they're from. One could look at this and say, well, I don't know where I'm from, so, should I even buy land? Like, would I be cursed if I bought land? But this is referring to a takeover. Well, did my ancestors do some taking over here? And if so, am I going to be cursed if I have land over here? And I would say probably if you have a mortgage, you ain't taking over anything. You don't own nothing. Interesting.
Yeah.
Weird little line of thought to go down.
We don't, as we're kind of looking through this map, trying to understand what's what, and how does America fit into the whole thing. If we are in fact Shem or Japheth or some part of Ham or whatever, that's technically all three can be stake some claim to America. And then on top
Possibly.
of that,
Yeah.
then you've got, talks of like, okay, so let's say it's Shem. Well, if you're from somehow you can just figure out where you're from exactly, and you're from the land of Shem, then when you come over as like an immigrant, or you come over as a, let's use like manifest destiny as a term, like, well, this land was given to us by God, we're just going to take it. And it's almost like, well, what do you do with the people that were there? And we see that with Israel. He says, go into that land, this is yours, go take it. And it's not as pretty as we think it to be. And in modern times, we're like, oh well, we have to make peace with the people that are there, and they didn't do that in the Israel times. They said, that's your land, go take it. And so I wonder like how that plays a factor in like the way the world has moved since then, of like, hey, this is ours. Like, we're coming back to take what's already ours. And sorry, it's just kind of definitely a weird thing to play with modern politics and borders and, nations and stuff like that. It really makes you wonder, how do you actually play some of that out?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess there would be a way to play it out. You could probably come to a conclusion on that if there was a
Mm.
way to truly know where you were from.
Right. You'd have to have the deed.
All right, guys. Well, we had an interesting talk with chapter 9. We didn't think at first it was going to be a lot of content for us to go through because it was just a lot of who gets what, that sort of thing. But it has been there's been some really eye-opening points made here and things to look at. So again, this is just our take, our spin on this, kind of our line of thought. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say. So let us know down in the comments below. And we will see you next time for chapter 10 in the book of Jubilees. God bless.
Ciao.
Shalom.
Hey guys, and welcome to Anchor.